watching paint dry waiting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Any disclosure of interest? Before we get started, we have an interim detachment commander, Sean Nash. So welcome to Norfolk, Sean. I was wondering if you could take a few minutes just to tell us a little bit about yourself, and so that the board knows and television audience knows.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, my name is Sean Nash. I'm inspector with the Ontario Provincial Police. My home location is out of our West Region headquarters. My portfolio is currently our business and finance. So I have responsibility for obviously a number of business operations and financial for the region, including the portfolio as regional liaison for the auxiliary program, regional liaison for contract policing, for our facilities management. Additionally, I have community mobilization, media, as well as community safety within that portfolio. So there are a number of, can be a very busy spot and very active. So previously I come from, I started my career in traffic in Burlington. I worked in general duties in Brant County. From there I was with the tech crime unit, worked in major cases and crimes against children. I spent some time with intelligence in two different capacities, both as a manager of an analytical unit and as a deployed intelligence officer in Niagara Falls, working with our provincial weapons enforcement unit. From there, I was executive officer to Deputy Todd at the time in investigations of organized crime. I did a stint with as executive officer to the commissioner, current Commissioner Vince Hawks. And from there, I spent some time in our Communications and Technology Services Bureau, responsible for a number of the major projects, a number of the technology initiatives that we actually enjoy today, including things like ALPR, mobile workstation, live scan, a number of other ongoing initiatives. I spent a number of months as interim detachment commander in Oxford County, and I'm here today on a temporary assignment for what is believed to be a 4-month period, and glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for introducing yourself. I was wondering if you could introduce Anne too, just so that all members know.
Yeah, absolutely. We have Acting Staff Sergeant Ann Ferguson here as an observer. Would you like her to?
I wouldn't mind just giving us the Reader's Digest version.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. I started in Norfolk back in 2007. I was promoted up to Brant County Detachment in 2014 and returned back to Norfolk about a year and a half ago after having my daughter. My husband works opposite me here in Norfolk County, so one of us is always working if you're looking for Sergeant Ferguson there.
Well, thank you very much for it. So moving on, if we, we have the, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this, the minutes of June 28th, any errors or omissions?
Well, Mr. Chair, was John Wells here that day? I was here.
But maybe you were at the health meeting minutes.
Wednesday, June 28th.
No, you were here.
68.
Yeah.
I made some motions, so I'm just curious how John got in here.
No, it was just carried forward. I understand that there's a new system and
It's okay.
with a lot of pre-population, so.
I don't want anybody to think I didn't read the notes.
If we could, are there any errors or omissions? And I'm just assuming that the follow-up on the Cockshut Road would happen during the inspector's report when you report on speed spy. There was to be a follow-up with respect to traffic going in and out of Port Dover on Cockshut. Okay. Any other business arising? Seeing none, if I could have a motion to adopt the minutes as corrected. Moved by Dave and seconded by Dave. All in favor? Moving on to correspondence, Port Dover Community Policing minutes. Any questions or comments? Uh, 5B, the letter from Staff Sergeant Fashing with respect to some proceeds of crime. Yes, apparently we did. Seeing none, if we could have a motion to accept $7.45 into our proceeds of crime fund. Moved by Jim, seconded by Dave. All in favor? Item 3, the letter to Jessica Steffen dated July 10th. Any questions or comments? We could move on to the letter to the board, 5D, from Turkey Point residents dated August 25th. Charlie, do you have any comments on that one?
I chatted with several residents. I don't know. I think it's just often in communities where things are pretty, for most part of the year, pretty sensible, if I can use that term, and then things can get a little bit crazy when people, I don't know.
Well, I guess my thought was that we just write back saying that it's after tourist season and probably there won't be an issue for another 8 or 9 months, and we would put it on our calendar for next June and see whether it warrants a speed spy study. Would be my thinking, but
People drive faster than 40. It's posted. Should be quite very well. Speed bumps all over if we have a speed bump, just a chair anywhere in the county, the public will be not aware of, so.
well, would the situation be bad enough that we should be doing it now, or would your thought be that it's really academic until summer season again?
This corner, and the resident that called me, this corner, I've been down to see it more than once. I don't know. I don't know whether a three-way stop. I don't know.
Sean,
I wish I had a better. I wish I had a solution. Dangerous driving, people not driving the speed limit. It's all over.
Sean, do you have any words of wisdom on this one?
So the OPPR analyst took a look at calls for service in that particular area over the last 2 years, and we have no record of any significant event related to traffic. There were 2 dated ones from back in 2001, 2005 from a previous resident, unrelated to the letter that was received. So we have not found any history or concerns with respect to motor vehicle collisions, complaints about traffic in that particular area.
Jim?
Only other comment, Mr. Chair, similar to the mayor's might be, and yours perhaps, just if we could respond that this did come to us here at the board, and given the fact that it is now shoulder season and soon to be winter season, it may not be appropriate to do any further monitoring now, but I like the thought of, if we can, if Maureen can remember to bring this back up to us again at a May or June meeting, and perhaps it would be worth deploying the speed spy just to get some hard data in that particular part of the community down there.
I think if there's a general thought that that's what we should do, I'm getting a lot of nods on that. I think that probably makes as much sense. So if we could move on to the email from Member Oliver dated August 14th. This would be, again, excessive speed going into Port Dover. Jim, do you have any comments on this?
I don't particularly, Mr. Chairman. It was interesting that the writer made reference to the mobile radar units, and I know we're in the process of acquiring those. Maybe staff will give us an update on that. I'm not suggesting necessarily we deploy the new one down there first, but maybe we can once we get one. And again, I'm really anxious for the board to see these things, and I know one was posted in Hillcrest for a few days last week. I think both the mayor and I saw it when we were heading to Langton for the fair. And I will point out I was going under the posted speed limit that day, not over. But anyway, so I don't know whether that's a new one or one we had, but I'm curious to see them go in places like this when we can in response to these kinds of concerns. But maybe staff will respond.
John?
Mr. Chair, just in terms of the signs, unfortunately, I don't have good news. As far as that grant goes, our grant was denied. We will go forward again next year and with the application. The flavor of the grant this year focused on the aspects of human trafficking, though that was the Premier's priority. So unfortunately, this didn't fall into that. I'm optimistic that next year that priority will change. I think we pointed out that that road safety and deaths on our roads has to be a priority. So we will apply again, but unfortunately this year we were not successful with the grant.
Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, John, for that. So the one that we saw in Hillcrest subdivision the other day on McDowell Road, how would that one, how and by whom would the decision have been made to put that one out?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that the sign we had out that day was actually on loan from Brant County Detachment. Staff Varga advises me, and so our community mobilization officer acquired it, and we were able to set it up. And I believe we had it out on Highway 6 as well, coming out of Port Dover.
Go ahead, Jim.
So can we borrow them regularly until we're successful in getting one or two of our own, or how will that work?
We can certainly try to coordinate that with our neighboring detachments, but certainly they have the same issues in their area that we're experiencing here, and probably at their meetings they're finding traffic issues are their number one complaint and priority as well. But we will continue to liaise with them and hopefully have some usage for that sign and target it at our most troublesome locations.
Dave?
Mr. Chair, just a comment. There's one going into Belmont just south of London, and we're there once a week, sometimes twice a week. My daughter just moved there. They do make you very aware of, and if I kind of miss it, I get a poke in the ribs. So you do get very aware that sign is there.
Is there any net new information in this email that we don't already know?
Mr. Chair, we did, again, our analyst did take a look at traffic complaints in the area, and there was nothing, it was from the period of 2014 to present, and there were a couple traffic complaints, nothing significant. Subsequently, a speed spy study was completed in this area, that being a posted 50-kilometer-per-hour zone. The results of this included the fact that the southbound traffic, there was approximately 0.27% of the vehicles were actually over the posted speed limit by 20 kilometers per hour or more. And then with regards to northbound traffic, 4.42% of the traffic northbound was greater than 20 kilometers per hour in that speed limit area.
Is volume measured?
So northbound, we've got, there was a total of 4,024 vehicles were captured. Southbound, there were 753 vehicles captured. And that was from a period of between the 29th of August and the 31st of August this year.
So in 3 days, so is the allegation that it takes 20 to 35 minutes to cross the road reasonable or not?
I would think it would depend on the day and the time of day on a weekend. Excuse me, on a weekend, there, as we all know, the volume of traffic into Port Dover on 6 Highway is tremendous. Again, it's a volume issue. The speed spy, I think, reveals that it's really not a speeding issue. It's more of a volume issue. And I'm not sure how we can fix volume.
Jim?
Other comment I might make, Mr. Chairman, going back several years, we had had some complaints about motorcycle noise in some of our hamlets along the lakeshore, because that is now a preferred travel destination for motorcyclists, and I'm glad it is, to travel the lakeshore through Norfolk County. And we deployed some signs, which I had seen during a motorcycle trip years ago up in Grey County, just a small sign that said, "Ride safe, ride quiet." And it was just to remind the motorcyclists that they, are hopefully not going to be revving their engines and stuff in the hamlets. So that was easy. And we could do that, except on Highway 6, that is still a provincial highway, of course, and we don't have any authority whatsoever. I have no idea whether it would be feasible to contact MTO and seek permission for them to allow one of these to be put up on the southbound entrance into Port Dover on Highway 6, relative to motorcycle noise. And maybe if the board wishes, I could contact through the county's roads department and ask them to make the request and see if MTO would agree to it. I think it has helped in the hamlets. I've heard feedback from people that it has, but they're also popular to be stolen. We've had to replace a few of them, but that's something perhaps that could be tried.
I guess my suggestion is that we write back saying that we're going to speak to roads about signage and that we think it's a volume issue and get the speed spy data and include it in the letter and send it back. Getting lots of nods on that one, so I think we'll carry on. We also have another letter from the same person with respect to traffic, basically raising the same issues. So any questions or comments on that one? Seeing none, if we could move on. We have an email from Jim Oliver dated September 5th, 2017 with respect to a concern over 681 concession 14 with respect to a marijuana production operation. There's lots of background material on marijuana included in the correspondence. Basically, item H, which is a Simcoe Reformer article referring to a $3.9 million bust, a Simcoe Reformer article with respect to grow ops, Canadian Press with respect to marijuana legalization and the police not being ready by July 1st next year, and a Globe and Mail article with respect to Niagara College offering a course on how to grow it. So basically my thought was that we should deal with all 5 of those at the same time because they're basically concerning the email from member Oliver and background material for the other board members or for all the board about what has occurred to this point in time. So Jim, I thought if you could lead off, that would be great.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The main reason why I asked Maureen to put this on our agenda for an upcoming meeting is, as Mayor Luke will tell you as well, it's becoming a big issue for the county and for county council in terms of numerous complaints from residents who have property adjacent to where some of these small scale grow ops are starting to pop up. It's no longer just where it's being done inside a home, and that we know how those always worked, and those were illegal, of course, but it seems as though now we're into a gray area where they they may be growing marijuana under these registered personal use licenses rather than the big medical marijuana grow-ups like Marcan down in South Walsingham, which is a legitimate professional business. And so the county, I think, we've asked, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mayor Luke, but council has directed that our staff, in terms of planning and bylaw, should be looking into what authority the county will have or should have to try and regulate in terms of things like odor and setbacks from neighboring properties and so on. So that's what the county can do, but I guess I was hoping we'd have some discussion around this table about to what extent are the OPP having to get geared up for new responsibilities or enforcement responsibilities relative to this, first of all, the small-scale personal use medical grow ops, let alone what's going to happen in 10 months now on the 1st of July when it becomes legal to buy it for recreational purposes, and who knows who's going to be growing it as part of that industry. So that's really why I asked to have it put on an agenda. Whether our OPP and the board can assist the county in any way in terms of addressing these complaints when they come up, or whether we all have to just sit on our hands until the federal government and the provincial government come up with some rules that will give us some tools.
Sean, what items of enforcement can the OPP do when companies are hiding behind a designated personal medicinal grow wording?
So there's a couple of things here, Mr. Chair. First, with respect to the property, there's a matter currently before the courts which I'm unable to comment on. I am aware that a license currently exists for that property, so it is a legal grow. With respect to the legislation, some of the changes that are coming forward, we are currently training some of our officers on drug recognition in an effort to deal with matters such as impaired operation of the motor vehicle. That's more specific to the use. We are ourselves awaiting additional information with respect to the upcoming legislation, some of the changes, so that we know from a law enforcement perspective what steps we must take to prepare our members and to be able to communicate to the board what efforts will be taken. With respect to legal grows, there's certainly a number of things to consider. Certainly we will work with whomever, the county and fire services and whatnot, to take a look at some of the challenges around those grows. If they're operating under a legal license and they're working within that frame, then it really is not a law enforcement matter unless differing information comes to light. We would initiate an investigation as a result.
Jim?
So, and thank you for that very much, Sean. Even in a case where a neighbor may become aware that they think marijuana is being grown on an adjacent property and it's a new thing, is it correct that the OPP would have been or should have been informed every time there is a new license issued or a registered grower? I think that's maybe the terminology for the really small ones, the personal use medical ones. Are the OPP expected to be informed by Health Canada every time such a license or registration occurs, so that you guys know, as you said, the one in question here on concession 14 is a legal, i.e. licensed, grow up? Are we supposed to be informed every time in advance?
So currently we do not get that information. We would respond to information received from the public. We'd initiate investigation, and we are able to basically contact Health Canada, verify whether a license exists or not.
Basis then, if a complaint comes to us as a councillor or to the county or directly to the OPP, then we can respond and determine whether or not that is a legal operation at that location.
So that's the current practice at
Yes.
this time. Should that change, we'll take a look at, again, as the legislation comes out, we'll better understand what some of those notifications are, whether we'll be informed in advance, and we know exactly where these locations are within the county.
Okay. It's kind of a holding pattern now, though, I guess.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few things on this. Certainly, our staff is coming back next month with a report to council, and we're trying to figure out what the county can do and what the county can't do. We're not clear exactly what we can do and what we can't do, and we have two addresses that been brought to my attention, and I'm certainly you folks know where they've come in and got multiple addresses on the same site, A, B, C, and D. And so all of a sudden that license, if I can use that term for the purpose of personal growth, becomes, instead of for one person, can be as high as for 8 on that property. Because I'm sure you're aware, if I have a license, I can grow it, and I'm allowed to have one person designate that I grow to fulfill the requirements of their personal license. We have no problems, the county that I'm aware of, with commercial operations. Council has properly zoned them into the agriculture and industrial areas. The federal legislation requires a minimum setback of 500 meters to a nearest residence from that property, which is a fair distance. Our issues at the moment are with the enforcement of these growing it for personal medicinal reasons. So my basic question, Mr. Chair, is one of them. I have many. I have been called out and have visited the site at Concession 14 at Townsend on more than one occasion. My question is, on what grounds are we able, the county or our local detachment, what grounds are we able to go in and check to see if I'm allowed to grow 500 plants, am I growing more than that? The smell on the 14th concession, especially throughout the night, is horrendous. We have to do something about this, and I don't know at this point yet what we can do or can't do. But, Mr. Chair, the federal government obviously allows the individual to have the license. Who's following up with this? It's not the county, unless it's commercial, it's not the county's responsibility at this time. So who's checking up to see that I am abiding by the license that I've been issued, i.e. the number of plants? I don't know. Is it the feds? Is it our OPP? At this point, it's certainly not the county. When you're zoned agriculture, you're allowed to grow agricultural items, and we do not dictate by bylaw that you can grow this, but not that or this or that. So I'm thinking that these personal grow operations are going to be way out of control unless they're properly inspected and enforced.
John?
So my understanding at this point is that responsibility falls to Health Canada. We will take a law enforcement position and deal with investigations as information comes to light. If we're aware that a criminal offense is being committed, then we would initiate the investigation and subsequently take enforcement action.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that. I want to, if I can, through you, ask Inspector Nash. If you get a complaint from a neighbor about the operation across the road, is that grounds to go in and investigate? Would it have to be more than just simply a complaint?
So the initial complaint would initiate investigation, and there's a number of factors that have to be considered before we make entry. There's obviously a requirement for judicial authorization, so there would be additional factors that have to be considered. There's a number of variables that we would look at.
Thank you. And finally, I guess my concern is Health Canada can issue these licenses, but I'm not just too sure how many Health Canada folks have been down here to Norfolk County to assist us It's one thing to hand these licenses out, it's all great and wonderful, I don't have a problem. But I have a problem when people don't follow the rules and the neighborhood is affected in this way. It's not acceptable. I don't know how people stand it. And I'm not sure what we're going to do about it, but council will try to figure out what we can do and can't do next month.
Dave?
Through you, Mr. Chair, would these private homes or facilities conform to the fire code? Norfolk County would have bylaw on fire code. If it's growing in your home, the insurer of that property, maybe the property hasn't been updated in terms of being notification to the insurance company that they're growing that, the fire code. If a bank had a mortgage on that piece of property, would that make any difference? Or the fire code is something you might want to take a
Through the
look
chair,
at.
Dave, that's a good question. I have no idea. It's my understanding that on the 14th, and I'm just using, I'm not picking on this, I'm just using it as an example, but it's my understanding that the growing of marijuana is in the current greenhouses. Their former tomato operation last year, that's been converted over. It's the fans going at night, get the hot air out of the greenhouses that is causing the smell. So I don't know whether there's fire code for greenhouses or, I think we're just getting into this whole new territory of people growing. So you're asking a good question, I don't know.
Through you, Mr. Chair, possibly through your fire chief or their staff, if they could speak to their association, the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs. They generally have positions on a number of items such as that, Charlie. I don't know if they do. I used to have some involvement with that organization, and they were pretty forward-thinking. And it may be worth asking the question through your fire department.
Mr. Chair, I will send off an email to the fire chief on this. I guess another way of looking at it, let's say if it was a greenhouse or an outbuilding, whether you got a tomato plant in there or you're growing cucumbers or onions in a greenhouse or marijuana, I don't think the fire regulations probably, I mean, if we don't go in and inspect greenhouses for tomatoes and peppers or what else is grown there, again, we don't distinguish between the product that's grown. Certainly on new buildings, it has to meet fire code and building requirements, yes. There's a lot of work to do here.
I just have one question. I guess we're kind of beating up on county, but I noted in Fritz's email that he said that there was going to be some sort of response, and you have confirmed that within the next month you're expecting a report to council. Who has been tasked to do that, and what is their mandate and scope of review? I mean, are they supposed to have OPP involvement? Are they supposed to have community people who are affected involved? Are they supposed to come up with new planning wording? And I mean, in the case of planning wording, you're already pushing the envelope for July 1st. So I guess that's really my question. I see from Fritz's email that he was expecting the OPP to be invited to whatever task was requested to do that. So I guess I'm not sure how that is being handled.
Mr. Chair and Jim, you maybe want to chirp in here and assist me, but it was a direction of staff, and Mr. Baird is the one that is responsible to bring back the report. I know that the clerk's department will be involved, i.e. the multiple addresses. I've been asked by the residents if we can go ahead now and rescind those addresses. I don't know if Andy says that'll all come in on the report, investigating that. If you give out multiple addresses and then rescind them, does that mean you lose the license that you've been applied for and been approved of? That becomes almost a legal issue. I don't know whether they're going to be, Chris Baird with his report, going to be involving the OPP in any way, commenting on certain issues. We didn't discuss it at great length. We just basically said, we're getting a lot of complaints. I know the bylaw is a key component of this as to what our bylaw can do and cannot do. Outside of that, I don't know if, I don't think planning's going to be involved, Jim. The planning is pretty straightforward. It's 2 zones. It's for any commercial. This is, again, not about the commercial operations. This is solely about the personal growth and the enforcement. How do we know that people are following the growing as per their application? How do we know? How do we know somebody that's allowed to grow 100 plants isn't growing 800? Who can tell us that? Who can enforce that? We as a county don't know how to have the answer for that yet.
Jim? Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the mayor. I think there may need to be some modifications to our bylaw relative to this new phenomenon now of the small personal use ones. The wording in our bylaw now, which was new wording put in response to Health Canada granting the large commercial licenses. We now have that covered in our bylaw. But I believe, and I looked in the context of these recent complaints, the small scale, and there was one in my ward that also prompted me to look, the small scale personal use medical ones aren't really captured in the wording in our bylaw. So part of it may be that we may have to have further wording in our bylaw, which then allows bylaw department staff to enforce that. Will it cover things like the number of plants? No, it won't. I mean, that's where the Health Canada rules come in. So I'm also, Mr. Chair, as you just referenced, looking at Fritz's response to the complainant, and he does reference the county solicitor, the OPP, and other departments, which would include fire service, would be all hopefully part of that consultation before they come back to council with this report. So we can certainly make sure that the board receives that report once it comes to council as well. And I do have one final little question, if I could pose it.
Sure, absolutely.
Back to our inspector. Hearing what Mayor Luke just said, when we receive a complaint or when the OPP receives a complaint, it triggers an investigation, and you have the means by which to determine whether or not that location is growing under a new license or registration, I think you said. Would the information that you can find tell you how many plants are legally being grown under that license or registration? And if, as the mayor suggested, a scenario where they're growing more than they're legally licensed or registered to grow, does that become a criminal offense at that point? And that's a lot of questions, and I'm sorry for that, but.
So when we do initiate investigation, we are able to contact Health Canada, and we are able to verify the number of plants they're allowed to grow. The subsequent question with respect to the appropriate charges in that case, I would have to...
We would have to consult with Health Canada and determine just how many plants they were over. And the exact charge wording, I don't know off the top of my head, but it is an offense. Correct.
And you can find out on any location, irrespective of whether there's an investigation going on or not, how many plants they're able to grow.
The license issued by Health Canada will state how many plants they are allowed to grow, as well as how much product they're allowed to keep on site, i.e. dried product processed product.
Okay, so any complaint that comes in, I mean, a counselor gets a complaint about one of these grow operations, and you would be able to tell that complainant how many plants that person is able to?
I would not divulge that. I would simply indicate whether they had a license or not. I would not divulge any information on that license, because that's privileged information.
But it still seems to me that if there's 5,000 plants in some of these greenhouses, that's a lot of people that have diverted their prescription to that particular grow area. I mean, that seems to be a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins and...
Health Canada issues licenses with various numbers on them. And Health Canada determines the number of plants, and we have to go by those numbers. So it would be advantageous to perhaps ask Health Canada how they determine that, as we have to go by what they issue on the license.
Charlie?
On that item, Mr. Chair, the neighbors that I've met with in my office have provided a lot of information that they've researched. One of the things that is a possibility, and I just want to get back to the comment on the number of plants and the determination, but one of the things that they've researched is some of the municipalities are starting to address this under what's called a nuisance bylaw. We can monitor noise, and I'm not sure what you do determining where the smell is unacceptable or to the point where it's not acceptable. So we'll be learning more about nuisance bylaws in this report, I'm sure. But the information they gave me is if I had to go to my family doctor and he or she determines that I can use so many grams of marijuana to deal with my pain or whatever my ailment is, there is a calculator that Health Canada has, a calculator program, if I will, and I've got an example of it in my file, and I didn't bring it, where when you punch in the grams, it automatically calculates the number of plants that I'm allowed. So not everybody that gets a personal medical marijuana permit, if I can use that term, necessarily grows the same amount, but it's determined by the number of quantity that my physician writes the letter, which I will forward with my application, and Health Canada determines the number, and that would be on the license, I would believe. I'm learning bits and pieces. I'm no expert on this. It's like I say, it's something that I think is we're going to have to deal with. Thank you.
Jim?
And Mr. Chairman, and I was really encouraged by what Staff Sergeant Varga just told us in terms of what information we can get as the OPP when we receive a complaint. I guess an important question for me would be to staff, will there be a mechanism, if not already in place, as something we could ask for the authority to do, that would empower an officer to go and just make a visit and do an inspection to compare the number of plants that the registration or license says Mr. Jones can grow with the number of plants observed to be growing in that greenhouse or in that barn or wherever it might be. Whether you need a search warrant or whether some other authority could be, if it's not already there, could be granted to the OPP. Not that you're going in to lay a charge necessarily, but it's an inspection to ensure compliance with the license. And I'm not necessarily asking for an answer to that now, but to me that would be an important tool, and it would be an important deterrent for these license or registration holders to discourage them from abusing it, i.e. growing more than they're allowed to grow.
Joe?
That would be ideal, and it would probably require some legislative changes. Right now, Health Canada is the issuer of the license, and they can check as to whether it's in compliance or not. We have legislation that we have to work with, i.e. Grounds for warrants and whatnot, but perhaps that'll come with the new legislation. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, they do mention on their website that it's all subject to local bylaws and zoning codes, but they didn't give us a big head start here on being able to bring those up to speed for their license issues. And I mean, even now they're not. I mean, if it has to be excluded from land use everywhere, if it requires an OMB hearing, I mean, we're pushing the envelope on July 1st next year anyway. And somebody would do something. So, I mean, it's just basically trying to get out in front of it. And I know these people are extremely frustrated, so. Dave?
Just, Mr. Chair, a quick comment. When we visited this, when the commercials first came up, Health Canada for all Ontario had 2 inspectors, just so it probably hasn't changed any.
Charlie? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, these things just, 3 times in the last 3 years, I have toured the facility at the west end of the county that Jim is referring to, a large commercial. All 3 times I didn't smell anything in the greenhouses right this distance from the plants. And I can't understand how the commercial can operate that way and smell nothing. And yet you can go to one in the local neighborhood that has a license for personal, and the smell is just, you can still smell it in your clothes when you get out of the car or after you visit the neighborhood 20 minutes later. And I can't understand how that can be. You would think a large commercial would have smell to it as well.
Yeah, probably
But I have never actually smelled marijuana at the commercial ones, but I can smell it across the road at the, you can smell it when you drive down the road with your windows up. There's something just, I just don't understand this business at all. It's frustrating.
Any other comments, gentlemen? I'm just assuming that Chris will get in touch with the OPP at some point and ask for their input, so.
I do know that today, actually, at 12 o'clock, Fritz from Bylaw invited us to a webinar downtown, so I think that's probably the start of his engagement.
Any other comments on this? I know it's very frustrating for everyone, but hopefully we can get out in front of it. I mean, when the medical marijuana bylaws were written, it came to council within a month. And I mean, it seems to me that it's doable. It's just, it's a long month. Any other questions or comments on marijuana, medical or otherwise? Seeing none, if we could move on to 5D, was with respect to Ontario laws changing for $50,000 fines for careless drivers. Any questions or comments on that? And our item M was the OPP overhauled sex assault investigation process. Questions or comments on that? I have one, because the way I read the article, it appeared that it was happening, the numbers were changing based on a coding error, and I guess I'm concerned that victims of sex assault do get proper and sensitive investigations, and that we're not eliminating cases just by coding, and that the investigations where initiated are followed through. So Sean, I guess I'll throw that one to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Ontario Provincial Police did initiate a review, and as a result of its review, what you refer to as a coding issue, basically a number of cases reviewed were actually cleared off as what's called unfounded. The term unfounded basically suggests the offense or the occurrence did not happen. And that's the reason for the coding error. In a lot of these cases, the offense did occur, for whatever reason, there was not enough information. I don't want to get into what the reasons could be, but the officer coded it or cleared it off as unfounded, given no other option. Say the offense did commit, but for some other reason, we're unable to proceed with a charge or conviction in court. So I can say that of the 5,322 unfounded cases reviewed, 65% were cleared correctly, so they were in fact unfounded. 34.9% could have potentially been cleared using another classification, and 0.2% were actually reopened for investigation. And I believe one matter did result in charges and is before the courts. In Norfolk County, we had five occurrences that were reviewed, none reopened. So the OPP, as a result of that review and its findings, has initiated the victim response support strategy, which will include the identification and hiring of detective staff sergeants, one in each region, who will oversee all sexual assault related cases to ensure that the proper supports are in place both for officers and the victims of crime, to ensure the steps were taken, to ensure that officers receive appropriate training in these investigations, and to ensure that what had occurred previously does not happen again. So there are a number of key improvements within that strategy that have been highlighted, and I know those positions will be filled in the near future.
So it wouldn't be the, let's say, the officer was in a particular zone when the call came in, it would be assigned to an officer with special training on that? Even if they had to come in for it or come from a long way away?
Yeah, so we'll ensure that a number of officers have the training. However, each case, whether it is in fact the zone officer that initiates the investigation, the results of that investigation and its process throughout will be overseen by a detective staff sergeant to ensure that certain steps. There may be an occasion where additional provincial resources need to be sought, and they will assist with identifying and facilitating those needs.
Any questions on sex assaults? Seeing none, if we could have a motion to adopt as information everything except the letter from Staff Sergeant Fashing, since we have a separate motion for that. Moved by Jim, seconded by Dave. All in favor? Thank you. Inspector's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So referring to the August 2017 report, and I'll proceed in the order of report, and my apology if I'm not following exactly what you might be used to. So I will speak first to the overtime spending. The amount spent to date in 2017 is approximately $213,506,000 in comparison to last year. This time would have been $281,986. So spent to date, we're at 59.33% compared to last year at 76.13%. Norfolk County will continue to manage its overtime allotment given our operational situation. The auxiliary hours reported for the month of August are at 247, and I will make comment to the hours from June and July. In June, there were 446 hours and 379 in July. Currently, within the auxiliary program, we are carrying approximately 9 vacancies, and we do have at this time permission to overfill that program, so we will be looking to bring in a number of officers in the coming months. With reference to the Crime Stoppers report from August 2017, we have